To come to order. We're here today to begin discussing the mining law of 1872, which governs hard rock mining on public lands, and consider ways to bring this outdated law into the 21st century. To put things in perspective, back in 1872, Ulysses S. Grant was president and signed legislation from this committee establishing what is now Yellowstone National Park. National parks are often called America's best idea, but at this point, I don't think anyone would say the same about the mining law of 1872. It's been more than 13 years since this committee has held hearings on mining reform, and it's really time for us to look at the sensible updates that needs to be done. I know we can pursue mining reform responsibly, bearing in mind mining's importance to our national defense and economic security. That includes making sure that taxpayers are getting a fair return on these federal resources, and we maintain American competitiveness, and that we encourage the development of secure critical mineral supply chains. Debates surrounding our public lands and natural resources are incredibly complicated, so I'm very glad we have this panel of experts before us for this discussion. I want to thank my friend and colleague, Senator Cortez Masto, for requesting this hearing and helping to bring everyone to the table. I believe that it's important that taxpayers don't get shortchanged on revenue when it comes to resources on federal lands, especially when compared to going rates on state and private lands. I also believe it is crucial for the United States to continue to be viewed as an attractive jurisdiction for mining investments. Now more than ever, developing new sources of critical minerals is vital to our energy independence and national security. It's true that we don't have significant deposits of critical minerals here in the United States, but for the elements that we do have, like rare earth of lithium, we need to responsibly develop these domestic resources, and many of those minerals are on federal lands in the West. It makes no sense at all to put our lithium-ion battery supply chain in the hands of foreign actors like China when we have lithium here that can provide a reliable source of domestic manufacturing. To that end, Energy Act that we got enacted almost a year ago and the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is pending in the House, would make significant investments in a domestic critical mineral supply chain. Reduced investment in mining on federal lands would counteract those efforts. However, I believe that this new critical mineral gold rush actually means that mining reform is more timely than ever. For the American public to support the necessary investments in domestic mining, we need to make sure that we have mining laws in place that help to address abandoned mine lands, provide for reasonable land management, and to ensure a fair return to the taxpayers. In 1872, in the aftermath of the California gold rush, the mining law arguably made sense as Congress tried to encourage the development of the West. Today, one of the most obvious problems is that the mining law fails to require a royalty for hard rock mining on federal lands and continues to mandate the existing claim and patent system. These are resources owned by every single American. The fact that over $5 billion in minerals can be mined each year, taken off the federal land, and sold without a single penny in royalties is just crazy. It makes no sense at all. Also, rather than permanently repealing patents, Congress has to pass a temporary fix each year to prohibit lands from being patented and being taken into private ownership for as little as $2.50 an acre. Further, modern mining works at an enormous scale using modern technology that would have been inconceivable back in 1872. Unfortunately, this scale has contributed to some enormous abandoned mine problems, and the public is often stuck with the bill. Unlike the coal country, where every coal company pays into an abandoned mine land reclamation fund, there is no revenue stream to address the enormous legacy of environmental degradation from hard rock mining in the western United States. It strikes me as fair that taxpayers get a share of the profits and a means to address abandoned mines in exchange for the privilege of conducting mining operations on public lands. While we may disagree on the precise path reform should take, I hope we can all agree that mining law is outdated and for the current needs of society and industry, and that we should carefully consider updates to address these shortfalls. So I look forward to the discussion this morning on how to strike the right balance with updates to this antiquated law. With that, I turn to my colleague, Senator Barrasso, for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you. It's important and timely to hold this hearing today. Just like last week's hearing, it comes at a critical moment. For the last 9 months, President Biden has been pushing an agenda that would dramatically increase our nation's demand for minerals. President Biden has pledged to end new sales of cars and pickup trucks that run on gas or diesel. The President instead wants Americans to drive electric vehicles. Earlier this year, Mark Mills testified before this committee that, quote, providing the refined minerals needed to fabricate a single electric vehicle battery requires the mining, moving, and processing, he said, of more than 500,000 pounds of materials. He went on to say that's 20 times more than the 2,500 pounds of petroleum that an internal combustion engine uses over the life of the car. This chart from the International Energy Agency makes a similar point. It talks about electric vehicle and how much minerals are needed all the way across. And for the color coding, the blue is copper, you got nickel, manganese, and graphite. The conventional car is just copper and nickel. And that shows the difference in terms of the minerals that are necessary for an electric vehicle and a conventional vehicle. So at the same time President Biden wants to shut down America's natural gas and coal-fired power plants, he wants to do more along this line. The president instead doesn't want coal, doesn't want natural gas. He wants utilities to generate electricity from wind turbines and solar panels. Mark Mills again went on before this very committee and explained, compared with a natural gas power plant, both wind turbines and solar panels require at least 10 times as many total tons of mined, moved, and converted into machines to deliver the same quantity of energy. Again, this is a chart not by me, but by the International Energy Agency, and it makes the similar point. At the top, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar power vehicle, nuclear, coal, and natural gas. And the color coding is how much is copper, how much is zinc, how much is silicon, chromium, all of which shows much fewer need for these minerals in natural gas and coal than we would have in either offshore or inshore, onshore wind, or any of these other sources of power. In light of these goals, you would think that then President Biden and Democrats in Congress would want to make it easier for us to mine here in the United States for these minerals that are necessary to do the sorts of things that the Biden administration's agenda is calling for. But instead, this president and the House Democrats want to make it more difficult to get to these minerals that we need. And they seek to eliminate all mining on federal lands. Well, as the chairman said a little earlier, so many of these minerals, where are they found? On federal lands. Last month, House Democrats advanced partisan budget legislation, their reckless tax and spending spree. That bill would impose punishing royalties on existing and new mines on federal land. House Democrats also plan to raise fees and impose a tax on mining firms. The fees, of course, would be based, they say, on the amount of dirt that they moved. You can't make this stuff up. House Democrats are planning to tax the dirt. House Democrats also want to repeal the late Senator McCain's bipartisan legislation to provide access to one of the largest copper deposits in North America. This project would alone create 3,700 jobs in Arizona. Their proposal is going to devastate communities and workers in Wyoming, Nevada, Arizona, and throughout the West. The House Democrats' legislation will also be a giant gift for our adversaries overseas, like China and Russia. According to the U.S. Geological Survey, the United States is already very heavily dependent on China and Russia for dozens of minerals. Many of these minerals are essential to our national defense and our economic security. The last thing that President Biden and House Democrats should be doing is increasing our dependence on China and Russia, but that's exactly what they are doing. So I am open to consider changes to the mining law of 1872. Still, we must protect American workers, mining communities in the West, and our nation's competitiveness. We also need to recognize that the mining law of 1872 covers dozens of different minerals. They each have their own market, which may be dominated by by state-controlled corporations and companies and countries that are seeking to undercut U.S. mining firms. And for that reason, a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work for me. We also must not limit our vision to the 1872 Mining Act. For example, Congress needs to enact meaningful permitting reform with fixed deadlines for federal agency action. Finally, I can only support changes if Congress proceeds through regular order and therefore on a broad bipartisan basis. These changes are too consequential for Congress to pursue them through the partisan budget process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brasso. I'd like to welcome all of our witnesses to the committee and thank you for being here today to share your expertise. Today we have with us Mr. Rich Haddock, General Counsel for the Barrick Gold Corporation. We have Mr. Chris Wood, the President and CEO of Child Unlimited. We have Hanna, Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense. We have also Katie Sweeney, Executive Vice President, General Counsel of the National Mining Association. And we have David Brown, President and CEO of YOBEN Incorporated. So now we're going to start with Mr. Haddock, and we have Senator Cortez Masto for the introduction.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ranking Member, thank you. First, let me just say thank you for holding the hearing today. We so appreciate you, working with us as well. I know I urged you to do this. Nevada's mining industry is critical to our economy. And as you said, it is important for us to work together and find solutions that support the many jobs and businesses it sustains while also investing in our community. So I am looking forward to the conversation today, and I am so pleased to be able to introduce Rich Haddock, who's the General Counsel of Barrick Gold Corporation. Rich has worked inside the gold mining industry for 30 years and has been Barrick's General Counsel since 2014. Since joining Barrick Gold Corporation in 1997, he has served in both legal and operation roles, including Regional Counsel of North America, the Vice President of Environmental, and President of North America. Prior to becoming an in-house mining lawyer, Mr. Haddock was a partner with the law firm of Holm, Roberts, and Owen, where he had a natural resource and environment litigation practice. Mr. Chairman, Barrick Gold Corporation began operating in Nevada in 1986. In 2019, Nevada Gold Mines were formed, which combined the significant assets of Barrick and Newmont Corporation of Denver, Colorado. Nevada Gold Mines is the largest gold mining complex in the world and is operated by Barrick. Nevada Gold Mines directly employs more than 7,000 people and more than 4,000 people indirectly through their contractors and local supply chains. Many of their employees are third-generation miners who have high-paying careers with health and retirement benefits for themselves and their families. There's no doubt it is a major economic driver, not only for our rural counties in Nevada, but for the state of Nevada. So I am so grateful and pleased to be able to introduce Mr. Haddock as part of the panelists today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. And now Mr. Haddock.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, Senator Cortez Masto, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to appear here today. I'm Rich Haddock, General Counsel of Barrick Gold. 85% of Nevada is owned and managed by the federal government. Gold mining is the largest hard rock mining activity on federal lands, as recognized by the CBO last year. And most of that is in Nevada, and 85% of that is from Nevada Gold Mines. So that makes mining law an issue of supreme importance to Nevada, and particularly to Nevada Gold Mine and its owners. The mining law has survived so long because it works. But while it works, it's not perfect, and there are refinements and improvements that could be made. But there are two aspects that are absolutely critical to preserve. The first we call self-initiation, which is the ability of the explorer to determine where they want to explore. In other words, where the geology leads them. The second is security of tenure. We believe that a royalty discussion should not be divorced from key land tenure issues and other aspects of the mining law. The argument that hard rock mining pays nothing for mining on federal land ignores the system. Nations take different approaches to how they're going to share their mineral wealth, and it's achieved through royalties, taxes, direct equity, or a combination of those. The U.S. approach has not yet included a federal royalty in the mix for locatable minerals and is focused instead on income tax, much like other federal systems such as Australia and Canada. In our business, there's a significant multiplier effect in the sense that we contract with a wide array of providers who also pay their corporate income taxes. However, in our federal system, it's historically been left to the states to impose mining-specific taxes that are in effect royalties. In Nevada, our royalty-like tax is about 8% of our net proceeds. Whenever the issue of federal royalty has arisen in Congress, going clear back to 1994, Barrick has supported a reasonable, prospective net royalty. Today, in line with National Mining Association's position, we continue to do the same. We support an additional claim fee earmarked for reclamation of abandoned mine lands. The gross royalty proposed by the House would increase the U.S. economic take to a higher level than developed mining nations such as Canada and Australia, and put it on par with developing nations that do not have the same high operational costs, particularly labor cost and long permitting lead times. The House proposal would make the U.S. non-competitive and drive production of critical minerals to the strength of the U.S. economy and greenhouse gas reduction goals into the hands of other governments. There are three foundational concepts important to this discussion. The first is we turn dirt into gold. The ore removed from the ground by itself is worthless. At our Carlin complex in Nevada, which is just one of our three main complexes, initial investment in the mills, the processing plants, and the mine infrastructure was about $7.5 billion. Every year, we invest $1.6 billion to maintain our facilities and produce the gold. Second, a hard rock royalty is not a cost that can be passed on to the buyer. Metal prices are fixed on the global market every day. Third, hard rock metal prices cycle up and down based on factors beyond our control and beyond supply and demand. The cycles are inevitable and sometimes dramatic. Disadvantages of a gross royalty: any royalty will reduce the amount of ore by making it less economic to mine. A gross royalty, however, is particularly aggressive and in a sense it dramatically shrinks the resource by making a greater percentage uneconomic, thereby wasting natural resources, reducing the return for the government, eliminating jobs unnecessarily early, and making less product available for commerce. A gross royalty on hard rock minerals is not a tax on the value of the ore, rather it's a tax on the investment, like that $7.5 billion investment I mentioned. A gross royalty picks winners and losers because high-grade deposits can better absorb it, while lower-grade mines, which still otherwise would generate jobs and provide materials and taxes, become uneconomic. Advantages of a net royalty. A net royalty better allows the miner to recoup the capital investment through the commodity cycles. A net royalty automatically normalizes for the cost of an operation, and in that way doesn't discriminate between high and low-cost mines or between commodities. A net royalty allows a mine to survive the dips in the commodity cycle while giving the U.S. the upside of the peaks. In sum, a net royalty would ensure that there is a viable mining industry to produce federal revenues and supply security long into the future. In closing, I want to acknowledge and thank Senator Cortez Masto for her caring and tireless attention to the people of Nevada, and it's specifically close to my heart to the rural people. She spends time and effort there, and I appreciate it. I specifically thank her for her support of the people who mine. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer questions or submit additional materials as requested.
Thank you, Mr. Haddock. Now we have Ms. Hanna.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and members of the committee. My name is Autumn Hanna, and I am Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense, a national nonpartisan budget watchdog. Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the General Mining Law of 1872 and its long overdue need for reform. Founded in 1995, Taxpayers for Common Sense's mission is to promote and protect the taxpayer interest, advocating for fairness and transparency across the federal government. As part of that, we believe that public lands are taxpayer assets and should be managed in a way that preserves their value, ensures a fair return from private interests using them for profit, and avoids future liability. The 1872 mining law fails by all these standards. I started my career with Taxpayers for Common Sense more than 2 decades ago, and hard rock mining was one of the first issues brought to my attention by our co-founder, Jill Lancelot. She had been advocating for reform of the law since the 1980s, working closely with both Republicans and Democrats. I then had the opportunity in the mid-2000s to advocate for 1872 mining reform when a bill, led by former House Natural Resource Chairman Ray Hall, was introduced in the House. It passed with strong bipartisan support. The reason there has been broad support is because the 1872 mining law is so egregious by modern standards. Though it governs some of the most precious hard rock minerals, such as gold, silver, copper, and platinum, and though these minerals belong to the American public, it entitles the industry to take them free of charge. This has led to a massive giveaway of hundreds of billions of dollars in minerals. Under the mining law of 1872, a claimant can patent or purchase a mining claim for no more than $5 an acre. The public is prohibited from charging market value for land subject to a claim. To put that in perspective, the 2021 purchasing power of $5 from 1872 is just 20 cents. Beginning in fiscal year 1995, Congress began enacting one-year patent moratoriums. The patent applications then in the pipeline have been grandfathered, but new patents have not been issued since. However, continuing the decade-long practice of one-year extensions makes little sense for the mining industry or taxpayers. Some of these patented lands turned into huge non-mining windfalls for developers, eventually becoming ski runs and housing developments. The total value of minerals mined on public land and the foregone revenue for taxpayers from not charging a royalty is unknown because insufficient data is collected by the federal government. However, based on limited data from the state of Nevada and regions in Colorado, in 2020, DOI was able to estimate that the dollar value of hard rock mineral production on land it manages was $5.3 million in FY19. Despite the significant value of these minerals, under the General Mining Law of 1872, hard rock mining companies are not charged for the value of these resources through a royalty rate. Other extractive industries, such as oil, gas, and coal, pay royalties for the resources they extract from public lands and waters. The hard rock mining industry should not be any different. Mining companies must compensate taxpayers for extracting these resources and provide an adequate revenue stream to restore our public lands. Taxpayers for Common Sense recommends Congress enact a gross income royalty for hard rock minerals that is commensurate with other extractive industries and applies to all hard rock production, current and future. There are other ways to apply a royalty, but a gross income royalty will be the most transparent, the easiest to administer, and the least likely to be gamed or avoided. As a percentage, a royalty would generate a return for taxpayers proportional to the mineral value, automatically increasing when prices are high and decreasing when prices are low. Setting a royalty rate need not preclude flexibility in its administration. Setting mineral-specific rates could account for variations in the cost of their extractions. Additional safeguards could be put in place, like providing discretion for the Department of Interior to provide royalty relief. Other royalty schemes are more complex and convoluted, and this allows for legal gamesmanship that could leave taxpayers with empty reform promises and little in the way of return on the extracted taxpayer assets. In the face of our current budget morass and with the need for smart fiscal policies, applying a royalty to hard rock mining seems like low-hanging fruit and could provide taxpayers up to $5 billion in new revenue over the next 10 years, depending on the royalty rate applied. Unlike many fiercely partisan issues, reasonable people from both sides of the aisle and many in the hard rock mining industry know we must update the 1872 mining law. This was underscored by a poll we commissioned last year with American Viewpoint, a conservative polling firm that found that updating the mining law garnered the support of 73% of Democrats, 67% of Republicans, and 72% of independents. They were concerned that it isn't fair to give away federal resources and treat hard rock mining different than other extractive industries. The case is clear. No business would set a price for land and stick with it for 150 years. No one thinks simply giving away valuable minerals for nothing makes fiscal sense, and no companies should be allowed to leave toxic messes on our land and avoid the tab for cleanup. Taxpayers deserve better. I look forward to working with the committee to make reform a reality.
Thank you, Ms. Hanna. Now we have Mr. Wood.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and other committee members, my name is Chris Wood, and I'm the president and CEO of Trout Unlimited. Thank you for inviting me to testify here today on reforms to the 1872 mining law. As you all know, abandoned hard rock mines pose one of the greatest water quality problems in the country. As the committee explores options for updating the 1872 mining law, I urge you to advance a royalty or fee structure that is reasonable and fair and that generates significant revenue to clean up lands and waters affected by abandoned mines. Trout Unlimited's mission is to bring together diverse interests to care for and recover streams so that our children can enjoy the joy of wild and native trout and salmon. In pursuit of this mission, we have worked to restore Appalachian streams affected by the curse of acid mine drainage, and we have worked in dozens of communities in the West to help clean up old and abandoned hard rock mines. Thanks to the support of our partners in the mining industry, state and federal agencies, foundations, and private donors, we've recovered more than 200 miles of stream from the scourge of abandoned mines. We appreciate your focus on this issue. There is no lobby group for acid mine drainage. There's no consistency or constituency for abandoned mines. It's time, it's past time, to make it easier for would-be Good Samaritans to clean up pollution that they had nothing to do with creating. I often say that TU is the patron saint of forgotten environmental causes. The EPA estimates that 40% of our western headwater streams are negatively affected by abandoned mines. These dot the landscape like ticking time bombs, waiting to release their toxic brew of zinc and lead, cadmium and arsenic and other chemicals that are poisonous to people. In the West, there are two primary obstacles to cleaning up abandoned mines. The first is lack of dedicated funding. We applaud the committee for including in its bipartisan infrastructure package a proposal to provide $3 billion for abandoned mine reclamation. That's a great start, but tens of billions of dollars are needed to make our lands, waters, and communities healthier. Unlike just about every other commodity that is developed from our public lands, there is no excise tax, royalty, or fee associated with the production of hard rock minerals that is then allocated toward restoration and remediation. We need a reasonable royalty to clean up these legacy sites. For coal alone, the Abandoned Mine Land Reclamation Fund has raised more than $11 billion to clean up and make safe coal mine sites in Appalachia and around the country. TU cobbles money together from a variety of sources to help pay for abandoned mine cleanup. Our staff are like alchemists with their ability to leverage funding, but the scope and the scale of the problem begs for dedicated funding to clean up abandoned hard rock mines, just as we have for coal. The second primary limiting factor is liability. When groups such as Trout Unlimited, groups that have no legal or historic interest in creating the abandoned mine waste, want to clean up these mines, we become part of what the lawyers call the chain of custody. That means that we could spend a few $100,000 to improve a stream from 25% of water quality standards all the way up to 90. It might cost another $1 million or $2 million to get that extra 10% increment. And today's law would allow either the government or a person who decides to file a citizen suit to come after us for the rest. The Clean Water Act and CERCLA, or the Superfund law, are two of the most important laws for holding polluters accountable and forcing the cleanup of many ruined streams and landscapes. The challenge is that companies behind most of the tens of thousands of abandoned mines in the West are long gone and their owners are long dead. Conservation can be defined as the application of common sense to common problems for the common good. Resolving these two issues will allow the nation to apply a lot of common sense to a lot of common problems. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today. Trout Unlimited appreciates your leadership and looks forward to helping you however we can.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Now we're going to have Senator Daines introduce our next speaker, Mr. Brown.
Chairman Manchin, thank you. I'm very excited today to introduce Mr. David Brown, the President and CEO of WyoBen, which is headquartered in Billings, Montana. WyoBen is a family-owned bentonite mining and manufacturing business that supports 200 direct and indirect jobs in Montana and Wyoming. And Mr. Brown knows firsthand the day-to-day work it takes to ensure that Montana jobs are created and protected and they provide for the local communities around their operations. Mining provides high-paying jobs, good benefits, and provides much-needed local and state revenue for schools as well as emergency services. He also knows how hard it is to permit new mines in the United States and how this process puts the United States at a disadvantage, forcing us to be reliant on foreign countries like China. I very much look forward to hearing from him today on how we can make it easier to provide the raw materials and the minerals we depend on for national defense, high tech, healthcare, and energy production. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Mr. Wood. Mr. Brown. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Senator Daines. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Barrasso, members of the committee, my name is David Brown, and I am the President and CEO of WyoBen, Inc., and represent the third generation of a 70-year-old small, family-owned and managed mining and manufacturing business with headquarters in Billings, Montana, and mining operations in the Bighorn Basin of Montana and Wyoming. WyoBen directly employs 140 associates in our Wyoming and Montana operations, and indirectly 60 contract miners. We offer some of the highest paying jobs in the area and have a significant impact on the economies of the rural towns and counties where we operate. WyoBen operates in the industrial minerals segment of the mining industry and mines a unique mineral called sodium bentonite. The sodium bentonite found in Wyoming and adjacent states has quality characteristics that are so unique that it is referred to worldwide as Wyoming bentonite. No other country is blessed with the exceptional quality of bentonite we have in Wyoming. As a result, Wyoming bentonite is used as a base material to create hundreds of different products that are sold worldwide. Your automobile engine was made using bentonite as the binder in the sand mold used to make the casting. The municipal landfill in your community would have environmental issues if Wyoming bentonite wasn't used to form its impermeable bottom liner. It would be difficult to drill a well of any type or install the miles of telecommunication and utility lines buried throughout the country without using Wyoming bentonite to make the drilling mud. The wine, beer, or fruit juice you enjoy would be unpalatably cloudy if not for Wyoming bentonite to clarify it. And finally, you would be unhappy and your cat would be unhappy if not for Wyoming bentonite's unique properties that allow your cat's waste to form odorless clumps for easy removal from the litter box. It's important to note that around 90% of the bentonite we use for our products is obtained from mining claims on federal lands administered by the BLM. Our mining is open pit, employing efficient modern mining techniques, utilizing scrapers and dozers, and a continuous cast-back mining technique we developed to place the overburden removed from one pit directly into the preceding pit in the pit series. This allows us to spread topsoil containing live native plant seed directly on previously mined and backfilled pits. Our mining circumstances and methods are quite different from those found in other types of mining. The deposits we mine are long and very thin, and our disturbance footprint is small. A typical pit is open only a matter of months before the overburden and topsoil is replaced, and we begin our planned revegetation process. As a result of our mining practices, we have received numerous awards from state, federal, and non-governmental agencies for our exceptional environmental stewardship. As a small business operating in an industry with inherently low profit margins and heavy reliance on mineral resources on federal lands, our ability to compete in the domestic and international marketplace is dependent on our ability to access and economically mine these resources. This is why any discussion about changing the mining law, the rules under which we have always operated, is of particular concern to us. Several significant changes in the mining law are being proposed in the hard rock mining section of the House Budget Reconciliation Bill that is currently being negotiated in Congress. Any discussion of changes to the mining law must recognize that this is an extraordinarily complex issue with 149 years of promulgated regulations and case law that must be dealt with thoroughly and carefully. The bill provides neither the time nor the appropriate venue for a detailed and thoughtful discussion of the issues inherent in such a change. The one-size-fits-all approach to mining law reform will affect our company's ability to remain competitive and possibly our viability to operate and offer good-paying, high-quality jobs, not to mention the impact on the nation's supply chain and the economy of our local communities. For all these reasons, I respectfully request this committee recommend to the full Senate that the hard rock mining section be removed from the final reconciliation bill before it is sent to the President. I appreciate this committee holding today's hearing as the first step in moving this issue via regular order, and I look forward to continuing to work with you throughout this process. That concludes my formal statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And now we'll hear from Ms. Sweeney. This talk will tell if it's on or not.
Good morning. I'm Katie Sweeney, Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the National Mining Association. Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and committee members for the opportunity to testify. We meet at a time when the demand for minerals is skyrocketing. In 2017, the World Bank projected demand for minerals would grow more than 1,000% due to the global focus on green energy technologies. More recent estimates from the International Energy Agency show those early predictions may have been far too conservative. As the world began to awaken to this exponential growth in demand, the pandemic unleashed a massive disruption of supply chains, further exacerbating our mineral vulnerabilities. The Biden-Harris administration early on recognized the path to repairing our crumbling infrastructure, carefully transitioning to cleaner energy, and winning the electrification race is paved with minerals. The administration acknowledged the importance of the mining industry through the January Made in America executive order's caution against the use of materials that are not mined in America, and the February American Supply Chain Order's focus on mineral supply risks. With $6.2 trillion worth of domestic mineral resources, a highly trained, highly compensated workforce, and world-class environmental and safety standards, we are well-positioned to help the administration meet its objectives. This committee has led the way in educating on the important role of mined materials as the front end of the supply chain for a modern way of life. Thank you for your leadership on these issues, especially your awareness of the impediments that stand in the way of revitalizing our mineral supply chains, such as the inefficient permitting processes that impair the industry's global competitiveness. This committee has been solution-oriented, taking positive steps through the Bipartisan American Mineral Security Act and the Senate Infrastructure Package. When it comes to updates to the mining law, we are at a crossroads. The direction we take can either help secure domestic mineral supply chains or drive mining investments offshore. With so much in the balance, we question whether budget reconciliation is the right vehicle for this discussion. There are numerous issues outside of the scope of reconciliation that should be considered in tandem, Good Samaritan cleanups being a prime example. We'd welcome an opportunity to engage in a process not constrained by the confines of reconciliation. Appropriate changes to the mining law provide an opportunity to decrease our dependence on foreign minerals, promote job creation, drive economic growth, and transition to renewable energy. We believe a net prospective royalty and preservation of security of tenure are necessary to justify the enormous upfront capital investments required to explore for and develop minerals. NMA also strongly supports the use of royalties for abandoned mine land cleanup, as well as enactment of Good Samaritan legislation. While modern mining reclamation and financial assurance regulations will prevent new abandoned mines, the industry acknowledges the existence of legacy sites impairs its social license to operate and is committed to finding solutions. In contrast, the highly partisan House reconciliation approach contains punitive proposals to sideline the U.S. mining industry, including an 8% gross royalty on new operations, a 4% gross on existing operations, and a 7-cent per ton tax on dirt and material moved during extraction. These excessive taxes and fees are the wrong path at the wrong time for our country. Instead of raising revenue, this approach will lead to premature closure of existing mines and little interest in future U.S. mines, exacerbating our unhealthy reliance on minerals from countries with far less stringent environmental and labor standards. Additionally, these new taxes and fees ignore the extensive taxes already paid. Current total royalties, taxes, and fees, or so-called government take, for U.S. mining operations is around 40%, similar to other major mineral-producing countries. The House reconciliation proposed fees would push the U.S. well above our competitors. Compromise is possible. The mining industry is open to reasonable royalties. Working together in a bipartisan way, we can assemble a package that helps secure our nation's economic recovery and prosperity for years to come without jeopardizing the mining foundation of our country. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and happy to answer any questions.
Well, let me thank all of you so much, and now we'll start the questioning. And I just want to say that I come from a coal mining state, and I come from an extraction state. I understand royalties. I've paid royalties all my life. I know about royalties. And I never could imagine that we don't receive royalties on so many things that we produce in this country. I just couldn't, because we pay it everywhere. We pay severance tax, we pay extraction, we pay royalties on top of that, and we're able to compete and survive in the market. That's all. So I know this is all about the money. I just want to make sure that we don't put undue pressure, but you can understand, maybe from my point of view, in coal, I know that if you buy coal from the private sector and I own land and you're the coal company, I know that we're going to negotiate, okay? I know I'm going to be in 7, 8, 9%. I know that if I own the gas and oil rights, you're going to pay me 12.5%. Pretty much know the going rates. And on that, I know that if I'm the mining company, I'm responsible now, once I start, for putting money away per tonnage to take care of basically the burden I leave behind. And so we're working through all that. I just have a hard time. So I'm not disparaging anybody how it's been since 1872. If we can find a pathway forward is what we're looking for. It doesn't put undue pressure, but there's a fairness to it. And that's all we're looking. And truly, I want to thank Senator Cortez Masto for bringing it to my attention and to our committee's attention to understand more of what you all are facing and what you might be, and the people, and also the states. I understand also the severance tax is extremely low on hard rock mining that the states receive. I've been through it, and I want to make sure you understand. I've had a lot of gas companies when I raised their severance tax in West Virginia because I needed it for my schools. So I raised the severance tax, and they all said, well, if you raise the severance tax, we're going to leave. And I said, well, please, before you leave, bring all your leases back because I'm going to pay you for them. I don't want you to leave mad because I'll pay you. I want you to have a good relationship with the state of West Virginia. I never had one person turn a lease in. We all worked and we lived with it. So we can make it work if we do it in a responsible way. So I would just ask all of you, and I know Mr. Haddock and Mr. Brown, because coming from the private sector, I know this has been debated and talked about a lot. And I know you're comparing it with other places of the world that you may compete with. We compete with the world all over in coal. We compete with natural gas and all the things that we extract. And we're still doing pretty good. So tell me, is there a pathway forward that we can negotiate? And basically, since it's not been done since 1872, if we would go, is there an incremental way to make fairness to this? Mr. Haddock, you might want to start since you're in the gold business.
The short answer is yes, Mr. Chairman, there is. And as I said in my opening statement, we've long supported a reasonable net royalty. For a lot of reasons, we think the net royalty is the right approach.
But we don't do any other extraction on net. We do it on gross.
I understand that. And as I said, a gross royalty becomes very regressive on hard rock minerals, the price for which is set in the global market. Unlike coal and some of these other commodities where the royalty cost can be ultimately passed on to the end consumer, it cannot be in gold. And that's why, in large measure for us, the net royalty is very important.
Mr. Brown, do you have a...
Yes, thank you, Senator. I believe there is a path forward. We would absolutely welcome the opportunity to have a conversation with all the stakeholders about mining law reform, about royalties, about fees, about all the other provisions of the mining law. But I believe it needs to be a comprehensive look and not just the slice about the money that we're trying to address today. Most of our mineral is mined on federal land, and it's terribly important to us that we have access to those minerals and that we're able to produce those and sell them and make something. We're in an industry that has a very, very thin bottom line. Bentonite characteristically is that way. And I think maybe industrial minerals in general is as well. So our story is a little bit different, perhaps, than some of the other producers. And we just would like the opportunity to be able to tell our story.
Well, that's why we have you here. I want you all to understand we're not looking at this as a punishment. We're looking at this as a matter of fairness. That's about it, and that's all I can tell you. And we do too much of this all over our country, and I've been involved for all my life around my little coal mining town, so I understand how this works. And we go with the market. We don't have control over that market price. It goes up, it goes down. Mines, basically, they'll stop production for a while because it's not profitable to produce. They'll come back when the market's right. I understand the market forces. So I want you all to understand, we're trying to understand this. And again, I thank Senator Cortez Masto for helping us understand better how we can segue in to making fairness and put some responsibilities on this in a much more prudent and a transparent way. And with that, I will turn to my friend, Senator Barrasso.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sweeney, if I could start with you. The House Democrats, to me, reckless tax and spending spree is going to impose new fees and new royalties on existing and new mines on federal lands. In addition, the House Democrats would impose a dirt tax on any material that's moved during a mining operation. Under the House Democrats' proposal, American miners will owe the federal government the highest rate of royalties, taxes, and fees in the world. If the House Democrats' proposal is enacted, is it fair to expect U.S. mining operations to close?
Absolutely. I think if you look at all three of those very punitive fiscal provisions in the House package that you mentioned, the 8% gross, the 4% on existing, and the dirt tax, just any one of those could have a profound impact on the industry. You take all three of those and impose them at the same time, you're looking at mines definitely premature closure, and you're not going to attract any additional investment in the United States. Other countries, will reap the benefits.
So then specifically, Mr. Haddock and then Mr. Brown, how would your mines on federal lands be affected with all of these three things?
Importantly, I think our operations would continue. We can't pick them up. We can't move them. But what would happen is I kind of describe our business as being on a treadmill. We are constantly trying to replace the resources that we deplete as we move through the year. And the way we do that is through investment. It's through exploration investment. It's through R&D, coming up with ways to convert what would otherwise be waste into ore. It's a very, very large investment. And so what happens in our industry is, we have to balance our capital throughout the world and throughout our other deposits. So we would continue to mine our deposits, but our growth profile in the United States would continue to decline. And particularly with the gross royalties, it would decline much, much faster.
Okay. And Mr. Brown?
It would have a significant impact on us. An 8% royalty, a 7 cent per ton so-called dirt tax, and understand that in the bentonite industry, we take the overburden out of the pit, we put it on the bank. That's the first touch. We put it back in the pit to do the reclamation. That's the second touch. The bentonite we touch is oftentimes 3 times before it ever gets to the plant to go through the processing. So I don't fully understand how that tax would apply, but and then perhaps any of the other fees or the cost of, the additional cost of monitoring the whole process through our operation, it would create a significant burden to us that very likely we would not be able to pass through to our customers because of the nature of many of our customers. It might very likely open up the possibility of competition from overseas as well.
So you're a 70-year-old family-owned bentonite mining operation. You joined the company in 1980. As you noted in your prepared remarks, it now takes about 7 years to permit a bentonite mine on federal land. Can you discuss how permitting delays for mining on federal land has grown over the past decade or so, and can then discuss the impact of these permitting delays have had on your company in terms of cost?
I'll give you an example. It used to be that we were able to permit in roughly 14, 15 months. We just received a permit that was critically needed for our Thermopolis operation, and it took over 7 years. Had we not gotten that permit, that plant would have been at risk of shutting down in 2022 because we didn't have all of the resources needed to feed the plant.
So as you consider, as Congress is considering changes to the mining law of 1872, should it also be considering meaningful permitting reform for mines on federal land?
I believe so.
Okay.
It should be part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now we're going to have Senator Cortez Masto.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I would love to just to kind of put this in perspective, and I so appreciate you holding this hearing at my request, because I oppose the reform that was, proposal that was put forward in the House of Representatives, because one, the legislation would have an unfair, outsized impact on the state of Nevada, where most of the land is owned by the federal government. and it imposes taxes on federal land. But more importantly, moving this type of reform through a short-term budget process would create uncertainty for the industry, and an uncertainty that supports thousands of jobs across the country. So it is fair that we have this conversation that is transparent, in public, we bring all the stakeholders together, and we figure out a compromise. I'm hearing today there's opportunity for compromise to work through this, and that's how this process should occur. So I want to thank you for having this hearing and allowing us to work through this process, because I think it is so important. One of the things, though, I do want to stress, and I thank Mr. Chairman for trying to get out to Nevada to see the hard rock mining, but I know because of the climate and the weather and the fires, we were unable to. But Mr. Haddock, let me, if you would, put this in perspective for me, because I know there is a difference between what we have talked about, oil and coal and that type of mining versus hard rock mining. Really, oil, gas, and coal are marketable, sellable at the mouth of the mine, meaning no refinement or processing is required by the miner for the mineral to enter the stream of commerce. In contrast, that's a little different than the hard rock mining. So could you talk a little bit and help us understand the processing costs in hard rock mining and how that differs? And that's what you're talking about when you're saying we should be looking at the net royalty, prospective net royalty, because we're not taking into consideration for hard rock mining that type of processing that's different than the coal. Is that correct?
Thank you, Senator. That is correct. And in our case, and in the case of most gold mining, and for that matter, in the case of other minerals like copper, when you discover a deposit, that rock has no value. And the only way you can turn it into value is by, and first of all, you have to find it. And in our case, we have a deposit where we have spent almost $500 million, and now we're just to the point where we're permitting. Then, after you discover it, you have to do numerous studies on all kinds of chemical parameters, physical parameters, and try to figure out how to turn that rock into a sellable product. Then, after you do that, you do your feasibility studies, and after you have designed the bespoke facilities to produce this ore. And then you build the facility at a cost of, right now, for an autoclave or a roaster, which is what we call our ore processing facilities, and a mill, it's $1 billion a pop. So each one of our mills would be $1 billion. We have 7 of them right now. Then you have to expend the capital every year to continue to maintain that property and those facilities, and to expand them and to refine them to deal with the ore that you encounter. It's a nonstop process that never ends of cycles of investment. And then and only then, when you get to the end of the product, at the end of the process, do you have a product, a sellable product. And then after that, as Senator Manchin said, we are very cognizant of our reclamation obligations, and we have our reclamation cost, and that too is part of our investment. And right now, Nevada Gold Mines carries reclamation bonds of $2.1 billion, which is about twice the entire coal industry in West Virginia. So, so it is a continuing investment cycle.
So let me ask and put it in, and I know you're steeped in this so well, but Ms. Sweeney, help me put it in layman's terms here so people understand. When you're doing hard rock mining and you scoop that initial shovel of dirt, you don't know what you have there yet until you go through your patent process and processing to determine whether there is a mineral worth anything. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There are years of exploration activities that take place before you would even know whether you have an economically valuable deposit. There's upfront studies that you're doing during that same time, and lots of information you're collecting. If you're looking at about 1 in every 1,000 exploration activities might become a modern mine, there's a lot of upfront work and upfront costs, actually, that go into that as well.
Is that why you have concerns about a dirt tax?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. I know my time is up. I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Now we have Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Utah is home to the last uranium mill in the United States, the White Mesa Mill. Now, domestic production of uranium has plummeted over the last several decades. It was about 40 years ago when we reached our peak, when we were producing in the range of about 40 million pounds a year. But in 2018, toward the end of this chart, we produced just 1.47 million pounds. Now, that doesn't mean that demand has waned. In fact, demand actually has remained relatively constant over the entire 70-plus period depicted in this chart. It's just that when domestic production diminishes, we make up for that on the international market. So in 2015, for example, the United States imported 65 million pounds of uranium. House Democrats are now wanting to impose some new features on this part of the economy, as has been mentioned already in this hearing, in their reconciliation package, one that would institute royalty on hard rock minerals like uranium. This royalty, as has been mentioned, would be 8% for some, that is 8% of gross income for new operations, and 4% on gross income for existing operations. And this is something that I believe would have a crippling effect on many domestic mineral markets in the United States. Ms. Sweeney, I'd like to start with you. How does U.S. dependence on mineral imports potentially threaten everything from our supply chains broadly to our infrastructure and our energy security? And specifically, how could a royalty like that being proposed in the House and a dirt tax like what they're proposing over there impact our ability to secure our domestic mineral supply chains?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And I think uranium is a great example of how we've become excessively over-reliant on foreign sources of minerals over the years. I mean, when the Energy Information Agency can't even provide the actual amount produced in the United States last year because it's proprietary information because there's so few producers, that's kind of a sad state of affairs. But it is one example of many how we've become incredibly reliant on foreign sources of minerals, even for workhorse minerals like silver and copper that are used in solar and in electric vehicles and every aspect of modern life. We're importing 80% of the silver, and we've got a lot of silver resources in the United States, and currently 37% of our copper comes from foreign sources. These types of punitive fees that take us outside the total government take of our competitors are destined to really freeze the investment in the United States. And the other countries will profit from that. And some of those other countries are not our allies either.
Right. Not our allies and aren't to put it mildly, anxious to see us emerge as the global frontrunner in green energy technology or any of the high-tech sectors where the United States has some real potential. Now, they also, as I mentioned a minute ago, also threw in into their package what they're calling the reclamation fee, which is, as I understand it, 7 cents that would go to the Secretary of the Interior for every ton of displaced earth. Now, help me understand something. It's already the case that mines are required to secure and reclaim all the disturbed areas of mining activity, correct? That's already required. So this provision would end up requiring honest operators to pay for their reclamation work of other operators? Or, like, what is the point of this particular issue? Or isn't this really just imposing an additional burden that could effectively force the relocation of some of these operations overseas?
Absolutely. I think that fee is incredibly burdensome, and it is really on the movement of dirt, which has to take place for you to be able to get to these minerals that we need so desperately.
Mr. Brown, you mentioned in your testimony that your company has had a significant impact on the rural towns where you operate, and I think this is the story of a lot of Utah operators. You mentioned the impact that the royalty and the dirt fee could have on you and on your company and other companies like it. After hearing from Ms. Sweeney on the disparate impacts that these that might be imposed by the royalty and by the dirt fees, would you say that the proposal submitted by the House Democrats, namely the imposing of a gross royalty tax of 8% for new operations and 4% for existing ones. Wouldn't that add to market disruptions and potentially force some of these operations abroad? And wouldn't that also have the potential to favor market incumbents and disfavor new entrants to the market, given the disparity between 4% and 8%?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. There is foreign competition for us. The minerals that we're mining, again, are low value, but they work their way through the value chain in the manufacturing system, and they become a part of the end product, whatever that is. And there's hundreds of end products that use bentonite. So if we increase the cost to Wyoben, and Wyoben has to increase the cost down the supply chain, it's very likely that our customers will be seeking other sources of supply so that their products can remain competitive and viable. And there are foreign mining companies, bentonite companies, that would be eager to enter this market in the United States. So it would have a dramatic impact on us. And the other thing that I want to mention, we talk about the 8% and the 4%. In our business, we have a plan of operation that encompasses let's say, a relatively small area. And we are updating that plan of operation as we move forward. So the 4% would apply to what we have today. But when we look at this, we think in the future, we're going to be paying 8% under the current proposal.
Senator Lee, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, my father did exploration geology for Anaconda Copper long before I was born in your state. And I remember quite fondly visiting my grandfather at gold mines across Nevada. He worked at places like Battle Mountain and many others. These are important jobs, and it's an important activity, but I think it is equally true that there are obvious and important reforms that should be added to the 1872 Mining Act, especially with regard to cleanup, and you heard some of that from Mr. Wood. I have to say that I'm disappointed that we don't have a witness here today who can testify to the impact that our tens of thousands of abandoned mines have on neighboring communities. In northern New Mexico, a foreign-owned mining company plans to open an exploratory mine for gold, copper, and zinc in the Pecos River Valley. This valley's residents know all too well what can happen when mine waste spills into your water supply. In 1991, spring runoff caused a deluge of mine waste to flow into the Pecos River, triggering an enormous fish kill and costing the state of New Mexico more than $28 million in cleanup costs in dollars at that time. I'm sure it would be much higher today. So this community and its economy are reliant on farming and fishing. Neither, frankly, can exist without the small streams that feed into the Pecos River. And both are at risk if a new mine opens in this particular location. And yet, even though the proposed mining activities are on National Forest land, land that belongs to all of us, there is no way for the Forest Service under the 1872 Mining Act to determine that a mine in this particular location is not in the best interest of the public. So unlike oil and gas wells or coal or even a gravel mine under 1872, there's simply no step in the process where the public's interest in the location of a particular mine is considered. Because this foreign corporation has purchased mining claims, they have an absolute right to build a mine, even over the objections of the entire Pecos Valley community and the Pueblo of Jemez. So I'm glad we're having this discussion. It's long overdue. I do believe there is a compromise to be had here on a reasonable structure. But as we consider these reforms, royalties, reclamation fees, claim fees, we also need to include the voices of the communities that live daily with the consequences of mine pollution. So I want to ask you, Mr. Wood, in your view, you've worked all over the West, as well as through Appalachia, on restoration. Are there some locations that are just not the right place for a new mine, places where it's just not possible to create a mine, to build a mine without unacceptable impacts on local streams, rivers, and communities?
Without question, Senator. Thank you for that question. I mean, a great example of that was an effort that Senator Murkowski was a leader on in stopping the proposed Pebble mine, which is on state lands, not federal lands. But it's shocking that federal land managers, public servants, don't have the ability to say no to a mine if the mining industry follows its steps. It's the only use of our public lands that they don't have the discretion to say no to, whether it imperils indigenous communities, local water supplies. It just seems like, and there ought to be a way to figure out how to allow that discretion while still honoring the investments that the industry has made.
So literally, it's the only use of our public lands where there's no discretion for the agency to say, not here.
It's the only use of our public lands where the agency doesn't have the discretion to say no.
Ms. Hanna, in the absence of a reclamation fee and strong bonding authority, who ends up paying to clean up abandoned hard rock mines?
So that's a great question, Senator Heinrich. That does fall to taxpayers, and that's where we see these huge shortfalls right now in abandoned mine lands not getting cleaned up, and we need to create a dedicated revenue stream, and we think industry should share in that burden with taxpayers.
How does that compare with other similar industries, for example, coal mining?
So there are costs that other industries do take on, and trust funds that we've created, and in the coal program and even in oil and gas. And so we believe that this is something that the industry could share in that burden, create a real revenue stream, and not put undue burden on industry. And again, we want to see this production happening, and we are supportive of responsible mining. So we want to be open to discussions on how to set up that revenue stream so that industry believes that it works for them, and we can see that it is working. But we absolutely have this shortfall, and that there's so many priorities competing right now for federal government funds, and this is just, we think the royalty and reclamation fee would be the way to drive revenue for abandoned mine cleanup.
Madam Chair, my time has expired, but I would urge us to maybe not take quite the zealous approach that the House of Representatives took, but to find a fair and transparent way for taxpayers to be compensated for these minerals, and also to create a revenue stream so that we can start cleaning up the tens of thousands of abandoned mines that litter, I think, every Western state.
Thank you. Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, all the witnesses, for gathering here today. This seems to be the next chapter of the same book, and when it comes to making this environment cleaner, healthier, and safer, but yet have affordable products. As I sit here and listen to you all talk, I wish, as we think about the permitting process, what a cost it must be to you all, and that we're throwing so much money at the permitting process. I wish parts of those monies were being used to make things more environmentally friendly or environmentally cleaning up projects. And I know, let's talk about bentonite for a second, Mr. Brown. It's a product that I've actually purchased. You'll be glad to know I just assumed all bentonite came from Wyoming. I had no idea that there was any other. But we learned today that the 20% of it comes from China. If these taxes went into place that the House is talking in their reconciliation bill, would we end up having more bentonite come in from China? How would it impact your business, you think?
Well, I believe it would have an impact, the severity of which would have to play out, depending upon whether we could pass those costs down or not. I doubt that we could pass all of them. There is 20% of what's produced in Wyoming is exported. Okay. China represents the major, they are the second largest producer in the world beyond Wyoming. And I would consider them a significant threat to some of the markets that we have. If we're not there providing the bentonite to our North American customers or international customers, China is likely to be they're right behind us.
Okay. Ms. Sweeney, I guess my next question is for you. Whether we're shipping bentonite in from China or rare earth metals from the Congo or other countries, their mining processes they do there, plus the shipping cost, what type of environmental impact would those have compared to the mining processes here in the United States? Is it orders of magnitude, exponential? Well, how could you quantify that as, or maybe it's a range, if at all possible?
I think it would depend on the countries that are doing the mining and processing. You know, some of them, for example, maybe Canada and Australia would have very similar environmental and safety and labor standards.
Well, let's talk about China and the Congo and General Africa.
Well, there's the ones that do not, right? So they don't have the same labor standards as we do in the United States. And if you're looking at the Congo and some of the cobalt being produced there are child labor issues that really, are pretty horrific. We've got an incredibly talented workforce here and we've got the right infrastructure. We can make we can do it right here in the U.S. We can make this happen.
Thank you. In Kansas, we've been fortunate to benefit from the NRDA restoration program. We took some previous pit mines, and it's now some of the best fishing and wildlife habitat in America, actually. What are we doing in the mining industry today better than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Share your story a little bit, Ms. Sweeney. What are we doing better these days? We don't have any mining left in Kansas, but I bet there's some great stories to share.
There are incredible stories, particularly on the safety and reclamation side for U.S. mining. If you look at the number of mines that go through a whole year without a single lost time incident, it's spectacular. The reclamation awards given by the Department of Interior for both coal and hard rock mining are really show how forward-thinking the industry is, creative, thinking outside of the box for what works best, not only for the environment, but for their local communities, and getting the input from their local communities about, what they want to use that land for next, leaving behind important components of projects like water treatment facilities for the communities to use. But I think also environmental monitoring is a huge difference, really to prevent some of the future releases that people worry about most. There's so much more monitoring.
One more quick one. This is for Ms. Sweeney as well. Does mining support abandoned mine cleanup and even increasing your contribution?
Absolutely. We are reasonable. We would like to talk about a reasonable royalty as well as some fees that would be dedicated to AML cleanup.
Thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. And now we're going to have Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a pleasure just because 45 years ago, I don't want to date myself, I did take a class on industrial minerals. And so this is now coming full circle. And Mr. Haddock, I appreciate a lot of your points. You worked for many years for my first mentor, investor, Jim Owen. So you were fortunate in that. And then I did start out as a hard rock geologist. And certainly I've spent enough time mucking around in bentonite and have seen it both in terms of drilling and extractions, but also in terms of using it as findings for making of beer, which I ended up doing after the geologic. But I think it's interesting we're seeing such a broad difference. I think it's very instructive between a bentonite mine and a gold mine and what the costs are and how you even think about that. And I think that's really does suggest, just as we wouldn't create a tax system as exactly the same as we do for oil and gas, it does begin to create that image of how would we go about this. And I thought, Ms. Sweeney, I'd start with you just to ask, obviously to meet our clean energy goals, and the reports such as the IEA earlier this year showed dramatic level of scale up if we're going to get critical minerals production worldwide to keep pace with what what we really need. And I believe, I'm someone who believes there should be some level of royalty there. But I thought you might, if you could just take a moment talking about the differences between and how it might pencil out between a gross royalty and a net royalty. And you don't have to go through the different minerals, but just because I think some of the people listening might not have the same familiarity that you and I do.
Right. Thank you so much for that question. There is a large difference, and I think that Rich talked about it in his testimony as well. You know, the gross royalty doesn't allow the deductions for the processing and the refining, which are really a large part of what provides the value for hard rock minerals compared to coal or oil and gas. And if a gross value royalty is imposed, mining companies are required to pay that royalty even when the mine is operating at a loss, since a royalty is assessed without consideration of the difficulty or the cost of processing the materials. There have been quite a few studies, including by the Department of Interior itself, looking at gross versus net royalties, and the department has concluded that gross royalty would result in significant job losses, losses to state and federal treasury, mine closures, and discouragement of new mines. And I think, as Senator Cortez Masto said, it also encourages operators to leave lower grade ore in the ground, thereby wasting public resources.
Great. I appreciate that. Ms. Hanna, I've always been struck that we still don't really know how much we produce of so many of these different minerals. I remember that 45 years ago, and I don't think it's changed at all. So independent from a taxpayer responsibility perspective, don't we need a full accounting of how much we produce in this country if we're going to have a policy grounded in reality?
Yes, thanks for the question, Senator Hickenlooper. We definitely need transparency more, and we need to have that tracking so that we can really understand what is the value of the minerals coming off federal land, what production looks like. It's hard to get assessments of what the impacts would be if we don't have that information and when we set these royalties. But I do think that we have sufficient information to know that the industry, and as I think everyone on the panel is saying, can absorb a royalty, can handle the impact of these new revenue streams and still be very successful and profitable. And I appreciate your mentioning the differences with various minerals, and we recognize that as well. And we're open to conversations about how to get those revenue streams for taxpayers.
Great.
But accounting is first. How many do we have on federal lands is important.
And just quickly to finish up, Mr. Wood, there hasn't been that much discussion of trout and wildlife and habitat yet. But I do come from a state that is riddled with abandoned mines and has all kinds of problems, both in those designated as Superfund sites, but especially those that aren't. And we know that it takes resources in mind. I thought you mentioned it earlier, but speak a little bit more about the Good Samaritan legislation and how that could really be a first step, not a total solution, but a first step.
Thank you, sir. Just to expand on your point, there's GAO 2 years ago estimated there were 550,000 abandoned mine sites just on public land. So it's a massive problem. It's huge in Colorado, which also has tremendous trout fisheries. It's over an assessment we did listed over 125,000 miles of stream across the country that are affected by abandoned mine waste.
Wow.
So what we're trying to do, and we've been working with industry and working with conservation groups to try to create a pilot program that would ease some of the liability restrictions that are tied to the Clean Water Act and the Superfund law that I mentioned. Just 15 pilots that would allow us to prove the concept that we know how to go out and clean abandoned mines. It doesn't answer the financing issue, but at least it would build confidence that we can begin to tackle these problems.
Great. I couldn't agree more. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for yielding back.
I gave you all the time I had. I didn't have any, but I would have given you all the time I had.
I thought I was seeing things here. Now we'll have Senator Murkowski.
Can I have the rest of Senator Hickenlooper's
yes,
time?
You can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Right. I might just follow on what the Senator has pointed to in terms of the collaboration that can go on. I had an opportunity to visit the reopening of Resurrection Creek near Hope, Alaska, about a month or so ago. This was a collaboration between Trout Unlimited and Kinross Gold. It's really encouraging to see industry partnering with the conservation groups. I said if the mining industry and conservation can come together, then quite possibly Democrats and Republicans can, although that's looking a little more sketchy nowadays, but I thought it was a good example. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for having this hearing today, and Senator Cortez Masto for encouraging it. This is where these conversations should happen. It should not be happening in a reconciliation bill on the House side or on any side where you just kind of shove something in and hope we get it right. The fact that this mining law has been around since 1872 kind of says something. But I think what we've heard today is nobody's afraid to be talking about what we might want to do to make things better, as long as we make things better rather than trying to thwart and to kill an industry that has been an extraordinary job creator and really a source of economic strength for our country. But we know we can go exactly the other way if we do things wrong and we do things in a manner that is not thoughtful. And I think what we've heard today is that to take an 8% gross royalty for hard rock production, a reclamation fee of 7 cents per ton, and a claim maintenance fee, these are going to take us in the wrong way. So let's talk about ways that we can, again, make sure that we are doing the right things in the right way. My goal, my mission here when it comes to mining is it's a commitment towards working towards reform that are going to provide the industry with the regulatory certainty that it needs, because we know that that is important for making investments, provide a fair return to the public for mining activities on our public lands, protect the environment, ensure this industry, which again has historically had some of the highest paying jobs in their region, but also to provide these building blocks that we need for renewable technologies and to have a future here. So I appreciate this conversation. I really appreciated, Mr. Haddock, what you had outlined in terms of just the steps that go into a hard rock mining production and why it's different every single step of the way in terms of how you get from the beginning of a project to the time where you're actually putting some product out there into the market. I think these are the types of discussion that we need to have. I want to turn my question to you, Ms. Sweeney, and this relates to the reclamation fee. I'm actually kind of curious about this proposal because this is not the first time that it's come up. It came up during the Obama administration. The EPA went through a pretty rigorous exercise to determine whether the hard rock mining industry should be covered under CERCLA. After a pretty lengthy process, they decided not to promulgate final regs because, and these are their words, they were unnecessary and would therefore impose an undue burden on the regulated community. And then they said that the proposed requirements would be disruptive to state mining programs. So if you have an administration that had taken a look at this and determined that this was going to not be necessary because it places an undue burden, how is this fee that is being proposed now, the 7 cents per ton, any different than what was looked at under the Obama administration?
I don't really think that it is different, and thank you for all the work that you did on the EPA financial assurance rulemaking and working with the industry to make sure that those kind of fees weren't imposed. But the dirt tax, you know, it also is not a solution to abandoned mine land creation. We have modern regulations in place today that protect our lands and the environment, and there's also over $6 billion worth of financial assurance held to fulfill those reclamation requirements in case operators are not able to do so.
Let me ask about that, because within Alaska, our Department of Natural Resources and BLM, they've got cooperative agreements to co-administer a bond pool that companies then pay into. And under Alaska law, we require that a reclamation plan be approved before the operation can be commenced. They review the amounts every 5 years, and then if the operator faces hardship or can't do the cleanup, the agencies first reach out to the industry. But every time this has happened, I'm told, the industry has stepped up with the expertise, the equipment, the labor, and more to do the cleanup to the agency's specifications. So as a result of the cooperation that we've seen, the bond pool has never needed to be called on in Alaska to perform cleanup. So I'm looking at this and wondering if there is an additional reclamation fee of the 7 cents. Is there a concern that this additional tax could undercut the willingness of companies then to step up on a voluntary reclamation efforts if they're already going to be forced to be paying more? What happens to what we already have in place if you do this overlay?
That is a really interesting question that I have not thought about, but I would think that our companies still want to do the right thing and be helpful and clean up the environment. But will the companies be here in the United States anymore if they're paying those kinds of fees?
Fair enough. Mr. Chairman, my time is up. I do have a lot more questions that I'll submit for the record, but I appreciate the comments from everyone here today.
Senator King.
Given the lack of this industry, principally in Maine, I come to this hearing unburdened by knowledge.
You'll fit right in.
He should be chairman.
I may have opened up something.
It's gone downhill from there.
Let me just establish some basic principles. It sounds like the industry is agreeing that there should be royalties on minerals extracted from federal lands. Is that correct? Somebody who's representing the industry.
Yes, reasonable net prospective royalty, yes.
And what does the word net mean?
Net means that there are certain deductions that are allowed for example,
Why shouldn't
for
it just be a
processing.
royalty based upon the value of the minerals extracted, just as in oil and gas or coal?
Because there isn't a value to the mineral before it gets refined.
If there's no value to the minerals, why are you digging them out of the ground?
Well, we're putting in the upfront capital.
You dig something out of the ground and you sell it, right? Or do you refine it yourself?
It depends on the company. Some of the companies do some of the refining themselves, some do all the refining themselves. But yes, there is no value of, for example.
Well, there's a value somewhere. You sell, eventually, this is for profit.
Eventually, there is value,
So
correct.
why can't the royalty apply to the value that you derive from the mining? Seems pretty straightforward to me.
I think that that's oversimplification. I don't think it's that straightforward because otherwise you would, we wouldn't have any investment here in the United States because there's so much upfront capital that goes into
I don't
mining
understand.
projects.
A royalty only applies after you're making money. A royalty doesn't apply up front. A royalty applies, you're digging things out of the ground, you sell them, you get a revenue stream, and you pay a royalty. That's part of the cost of doing business for these other industries. Why isn't that? Why doesn't that operate for you? Just the investors know they're going to make X amount of money, and part of that's going to be a payment of one of the costs is going to be the payment of royalties.
Well, part of it is when you know you're going to get a return on your investment as well. I mean, I think investors look to that.
Of course.
And there's a much longer time frame for hard rock mining than there is for coal and oil and gas.
I still don't understand why a royalty on the money that's generated by the mining is any problem. And oil is in a global market. An oil producer can't name their price. I don't think that argument holds any water or hard rock.
Rich, maybe you want to.
Sure. Let me try to address a couple of issues there because there's a lot of questions in there, and if you will, I'll unpack that a little bit. First of all, there's an important difference between the value of the mineral sitting in the ground and the value after it's produced.
I get that.
And the way I'll give you the example is...
No, you don't need to. I get that.
Oh, but let me give you this example. In our industry, when you buy gold in the ground, you may pay $100 an ounce to buy gold in the ground. When you sell it today, it's at about $1,700 an ounce. It's all that billions of dollars worth of investment that get you from that gold that may be worth $100 in the ground to the gold that's worth $1,700 when you sell it today. In Nevada, our net proceeds of mines tax, our net proceeds of minerals tax, is a good example of a system that is very transparent and tracks all the minerals produced in the state, by the way. Nevada knows exactly what they produce because everybody pays it, no matter what the mineral is. And in the case of this, what you do is you establish the gross, you establish the sales price, and then there are certain deductions that are allowable. They're very transparent, they're very clear, the system works very well. And what it does is it recognizes the value that's added by the miner in creating it. Now, different minerals are different in the sense that they do have location value. And you're right, oil and gas get shipped all over the world, but it's shipped all over the world at an expense. And the expense of shipping plus the expense of royalty determines whether or not that oil can be sold profitably somewhere else. The gold industry, for example, is very different, as is copper. That price for an ounce of gold or for a pound of copper is set in the global market every day. Nobody's going to pay you $1,700 plus 8%. So it goes to the mining company.
But the value of oil is set in the global market every day.
It is.
I don't see the difference.
Well, there is a difference in the sense that the cost of a royalty does get passed on to a consumer in the case of something like oil and gas or coal. Why wouldn't that be the case of a royalty? I mean, the royalty on oil gets passed on to the consumer, doesn't it? It does get passed, but
wouldn't it also on gold?
No,
it would cost you a little more to generate some revenue from gold.
No, because it's basically traded every day in a central location, and the price you pay is the spot price that day. Nobody's going to pay you for the royalty.
So's oil. Oil is set at a worldwide commodity market.
It is set at a worldwide commodity market, but as I say, there's a location value to oil. There's a location value to coal. There is no location value to metals.
So I'll ask you the same question. I am out of time. Are you willing to agree to a royalty on minerals produced on federal lands?
Yes, that is our position.
And you're going to tell us, and you have told us, I assume, how that's going to work.
We would like to model it on the Nevada net proceeds of mineral tax. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. And now we have Senator Daines.
Chairman Manchin, thank you. Mr. Brown, thanks for making the trek out here from Montana. And I want to hear more from you on the provisions that we're seeing in the proposed tax and spending bill coming from our colleagues across the aisle, and how that might hurt your business and local Montana and Wyoming jobs. We know that the House Democrats' version of the bill raises taxes on family-owned businesses like WildBen. It places new royalties on your products, and it makes it harder for you to support jobs in your communities. Mr. Brown, if the House Democrats get their way and they pass this sweeping anti-mining legislation, what would that mean to the Montana jobs that you provide and your ability to mine and supply the United States with bentonite?
Well, thank you for the question. And I would like to just highlight again that we are a small business, and that I believe the President has said that any new tax won't impact small business. Well, the taxes that we're talking about, the royalty, the significant increase in royalties would impact us tremendously. And again, our margins are very thin. Our ability to absorb an 8% royalty, a dirt tax, however that is defined, and other fees which may come on top of that, is going to be very difficult. And it's questionable whether we can pass that to our customers. I believe some of our customers would elect to source their material elsewhere, overseas perhaps, then pay that additional cost. So the outcome of this is that we may have to curtail operations. We have 3 plants. We may have to consolidate that production, or worst case, heaven forbid, shut down the operation.
And if that happened, that would just move the supply chain that currently, with bentonite, we get it out of Wyoming primarily. That would move it to countries like China to meet the demand. And how do you think that would affect our overall supply chains, and thinking about the connection with jobs as well as national security?
Well, certainly it would affect the supply chain. You think about all of the manufacturing that occurs using our product, and now, rather than sourcing that from Wyoming, they're sourcing it from China, and the logistics that have to occur with that, it's going to have an impact on supply chain, and likely a negative impact. It's certainly going to impact employment. In Montana and in Wyoming, these communities that depend upon a wildband as a major source of employment, it would impact the community as well, because the trickle effect of paying a wage as it goes through a community of 2,000 people in Wyoming.
Mr. Brown, thank you. I want to shift gears and ask a question, Ms. Sweeney. According to the USGS, the United States is now 100% import reliant on 17 important minerals. 35 of the minerals are considered critical for our national security and domestic use. 17 of them come from China. These numbers are only going to get worse as demand for critical minerals and materials only increases. If the U.S. is serious, and I hope we are, about building more sources of energy, including renewable energy, then we must be serious about increasing domestic mining. And if the U.S. is serious about protecting the environment, we should be increasing mining domestically and not allowing places like China and the DR Congo, who have terrible standards, to continue to supply the world and the U.S. with critical minerals. Ms. Sweeney, how does import dependency on places like China threaten national security, and how does the Democrat House bill make that situation even worse?
Thank you for that question. I think all of these new fees and taxes would definitely put the U.S., make us less competitive, right? The total government take would be well beyond our competitors if you add those on top. And that, of course, impacts our national security, right? Because there are so many of these minerals that are critical to defending our Army and our Navy, critical to nuclear submarines, critical to almost every aspect of our national defense. And certainly there are a lot of countries out there like China who control, for example, 80% of the rare earths market or even more. So they're cornering the market, and we're having to rely on them to protect our own troops. We don't want to see that trend continue. I think there's a lot of these resources we do have here in the United States. We can mine them responsibly here, and we should.
Thank you, Ms. Sweeney. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Now we have Senator Risch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't always agree with Senator King, but today I find myself in absolute agreement with him that he came here today unburdened by any understanding of the hard rock mining industry. Let me try to put this in simple terms. This isn't oil we're talking about. When you take a barrel of oil out of the ground, you got it, you can sell it. First of all, not all minerals are the same. They're all very different. Whether it's gold, whether it's silver, whether it's antimony, whatever you're after is very different. The cost of getting it out of the ground varies dramatically, and it depends on how deep it is. It depends what it's in combination with in the ground. And so it isn't that simple. And as was pointed out here, when you do get it out of the ground, it may be just the beginning. You don't get a lump of gold out of the ground in most instances. You get it mixed with something else. So you may not even keep it. You may sell the thing because it has to be milled and extricated very carefully. So it just isn't the same as that. There are other ways of doing this. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that there are other ways to measure it. Then it isn't comparable. You're talking about apples and oranges if you're talking about getting a barrel of oil out of the ground versus a gram of whatever mineral it is that you're after. So before I cede any more of my time, let me say, first of all, there's been a lot of talk here about dollars and cents, and I want to ask Ms. Sweeney and Mr. Brown if you agree with me that in today's world, market forces change the price of commodities very, very quickly, unlike years and years ago, so that if we do add an additional cost to this, that is going to affect our competitiveness in the market almost immediately. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Agree.
Mr. Brown?
I would agree as well.
Let me say we have an expert on this panel who knows how to resolve complex issues like this. Chris, welcome. Chris Wood and I worked together when I was governor to resolve the roadless issue in Idaho, and we have, I know Colorado claims to have one, but we have essentially the only roadless rule that has been sustained in district court and in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, believe it or not. And Chris and I worked together on that. Thank you, Chris, on behalf of the people of Idaho. Thank you, and thank Trout Unlimited for your input into that. It was very difficult to get the environmental community on board, and very few of them didn't get on board eventually, and the ones that didn't feel too good about it after the fact, after the Ninth Circuit, because everybody that was at the table got something. Chris, in that regard, you and I have been talking about this particular issue since I got here. How come you haven't got it resolved?
Well, first of all, thank you for your leadership on the Idaho roadless rule. I think it's a model for a lot of other natural resource issues around the country, where you brought industry and conservation interests together and we came out with a solution. I think that it's right here for us on this issue too. The other thing I want to commend you for, sir, is your leadership on Good Samaritan legislation. You and Senator Heinrich have both been working hard to bring industry and conservation interests together to figure out how to incent more cleanups of abandoned mines around the country.
Thanks, Chris. Let me, I've just got a little bit of time left, but I want to underscore a really, really important issue that has been alluded to here, but I think needs even a harder smack than what we've talked about here. From my position on the Intelligence Committee and on the Foreign Relations Committee, I can tell you that the issue of rare earths and critical minerals is an issue that does not get the attention that it needs in this country. And I can tell you that we're going to have to focus on that. Anybody who thinks that China is going to continue to sell us these critical elements, if and when we ever get crosswise with them to a large degree, is dreaming. And if you don't believe me, ask Japan, because they have cut off Japan one time for a very brief period of time, but it brought brought industry in Japan to its knees in short order. So in any event, jump ball. Who can tell us what we can do better to try to get rare earths and critical minerals out of the ground in the United States of America, which is indeed a very, very important national security issue? Who's first? And there's a lot of smart people here.
Senator, I'll jump in, even though I'm a gold miner. Like Senator Hickenlooper, I was once a geologist, and the important part of the mining law is this right of self-initiation. And we talked about it in a couple of contexts here that are important. And the first one I would say is that, and Chairman Manchin said this at the beginning, we don't have all the critical minerals. As a geologist, I'm a little more optimistic. I say we haven't found them yet. So we have to have a healthy industry that is exploring, and rational and reasonable mining law reform is an important part of that. I think that, you know, the second thing I would say is that the issue comes up of, you know, why can't you say no to a mine, or the argument is made that way. The one thing I would point out is we have land use planning, and it's part of the Federal Land Management Policy and Management Act, and it is an amendment to the mining law that came into being in the 1970s. And so there are big swaths of the United States, and Nevada, in Nevada's case, 85% of that federal land, 25% of that is not available for mine exploration. And so what I think is important to understand is that when you find a mineral, you find it where you find it, and you find it on the land that is available. If there are areas that are important to protect, we should protect those through the land use process. But other than that, we should be encouraging exploration everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haddock. And I want to yield my unused time to Senator King to respond.
We've lost total control of this committee.
Yes, you have. No, I want to emphasize that the senator is absolutely right about the national security implications, and I'm not unmindful of those at all. I just want to be fair to the people that own the land that's being mined, which is all of the American people.
Fair enough.
Senator Kelly,
Fair point.
you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hanna, I have a question about abandoned mines. And thank you for testifying today, because this issue is important to Arizonans. We have over 200,000 abandoned hard rock mines that we currently know of. Most of them are on federal land. The bipartisan infrastructure bill contains an amendment sponsored by Senator Heinrich, Senator Daines, and myself that would authorize a $3 billion fund to clean up abandoned hard rock mines subject to appropriations. The House might consider a budget bill that would appropriate $2.5 billion for mine cleanup. These funding levels fit within the budget top line, but we know it's not going to be enough. What amount of federal revenue would you estimate is needed to really put a dent in the cleanup of the hundreds of thousands of abandoned mines in Arizona and across the nation?
Thank you for the question, Senator Kelly. It's a very good question. We don't have, I can't give an exact answer, but it is definitely in the tens of billions of dollars. And I think we see year after year we're spending several hundred million and not even making a dent among several federal agencies. And I think we can do a better job there on the taxpayer side. But I think that this huge cost shows that we need a dedicated revenue stream, and we need industry to share in that burden with federal taxpayers in helping create that revenue stream. It is important to clean them up. These are huge taxpayer liability, as you know, they're public health risk, environmental hazards. They need to be cleaned up. And I thank you for your efforts to work on creating those funds from the federal government. But we'd also like to see those reclamation fees and other things and the royalty put in place so that we can have revenue stream.
Okay. I imagine that was discussed before I came into the room. I'm assuming it was. The revenue stream being a royalty, that we probably had this discussion earlier.
There has been some discussion.
Okay, good. Thank you. Mr. Wood, I also want to thank you and Trout Unlimited for testifying today. The Navajo Nation is just one serious example of why we need to address these abandoned mines. Over 500 uranium mines on the Navajo reservation were abandoned after the Cold War, and as a result, tribal members are dealing with contaminated groundwater and higher rates of cancer. If Congress enacts a reclamation fee or some other revenue generator on hard rock mining, should that revenue be prioritized for abandoned mines in the West and for economically disadvantaged communities?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. I said earlier before you were in the room that an analysis that we did shows that there's about 122,000 miles of impaired stream around the country from abandoned hard rock mines. 52% of those supply drinking water from municipalities. Absolutely, there needs to be the reclamation fee, and I'm not sure there's any disagreement with industry here, a reclamation fee, whatever the right fee, whether it's net or gross, it should be applied to cleaning up the legacy of abandoned mines that we have on our western lands.
Well, thank you. It is a significant issue in Arizona, and the more than 500 mines of the Navajo Nation is having a profound negative effect on the health of the Navajo people. So thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hoven.
Ms. Sweeney, in your budget, or in your testimony, you referenced the House Budget Reconciliation Bill that's under consideration. Right. And that testimony, your testimony includes the proposed new fees, taxes, and royalties that would impact mineral producers. How will these policies further hamper U.S. strategic competitiveness, particularly due to China's dominance of critical minerals and rare earth elements?
Thank you for the question. They certainly will exacerbate that situation. China will continue to be able to dominate because we will have less mining here in the United States if those fees were imposed. Just one of those fees alone could really have an incredible impact on domestic mining. You put those 3 fees together, and it's devastating impact. You will see mines close. You will see high-wage jobs lost, and you will see investment dollars being spent other parts of the globe. And they're going to take advantage of that and take advantage of those opportunities.
So this is clearly an example where the legislation will help China and hurt the United States and make us more dependent on China and potentially other adversaries for critical minerals that we need, including for our national defense. Is that correct?
Correct. For national defense and for all the objectives of this administration as well.
Mr. Haddock, similar question. Your company operates in 13 different countries, and you notice that our mines in the United States have, quote, in your words, have become drastically uncompetitive. So again, same thing with more fees and taxes and costs. Does that help us or hurt us in terms of becoming competitive, and how does that affect your workforce as well?
Thank you, Senator. Any royalty, as I said, is a burden upon the value of the ore body, and it diminishes the ore body. That's why we advocate for net royalty. What I think is important here to understand, and I'll just use an example of an analysis we've done. We created a synthetic mine and applied the various royalties. And it's interesting what happens to a gross versus a net royalty. This is why we think net's so important to protect the competitiveness. In that mine, right now, an 8% royalty gives it over 50% of the net to the government. That much goes to the United States. If that same royalty were applied and the price of gold drops to $1,200 an ounce, as it was in 2015, the federal government's taking 100%. And so that really illustrates that a gross royalty makes it very non-competitive. We do support a net royalty. It has an impact, but it's an impact that we're willing to bear and something we're willing to do to participate.
So, Mr. Brown, for hard rock mining, what would increased fees and royalties mean for your operations and for your workforce?
Well, any increase in our costs is going to have an impact. The question is, to what extent can we transfer that additional cost through the value stream to our customers and to the ultimate end user? And if we cannot, we have very little ability to absorb those increased costs because of the very low margin net profit margin of our business. So the possibility is that we would have to curtail operations, which takes production out of the United States. Demand for bentonite is still there, and it has to come from someplace, which China is the #2 producer of bentonite.
Do you pay all your workers more than $400,000? Does every single worker that you employ make more than $400,000 a year?
No.
So then for somebody to say that there's no costs in this bill, that wouldn't be an accurate statement, because there's a clear example of where costs would be passed on to your company, to your workers, to your suppliers, and to your buyers of your product, correct?
Absolutely correct.
Thank you. I yield the rest of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. We're waiting on Senator Langford's coming right back. But I would like to say this, Mr. Wood, the thing I'd want you to consider is basically, I do truly in my heart of hearts believe that we're going to pass the bipartisan infrastructure bill. If nothing else gets done, that bill will sooner or later. With that, there's $3 billion in that. Have you all identified, because I think you all have done a tremendous job as far as Trout Unlimited, identifying the most critical needs we have and the most damage and harm that's doing to the citizens of our country. Have you put a list together of basically how that would be, or how you would recommend, or your oversight, so we can work with Interior?
Oh, we could get that list to you right quick, sir.
If you would do that, sir, I want you you're just waiting, aren't you?
There might be some trout waters mixed in there, too.
There's nothing wrong with that. You know that. And I have a few myself. Anyway, but if you would, we'd like to look at what you're putting together of how you would identify the most critical needs we have in our country, really, truly, and the most damaging. So use the highest priority, damaging as far as water quality, and then also recreational. If you could do that.
We can do that.
All of you have been great, and this is a tough one. I think we can work through this. I really do. I think we can find a pathway for it. Net and gross, I understand net and gross pretty good, but, and I understand where you're coming from. I'd rather have net too. Is there somewhere in between? And we'll talk. We're going to work on this, and we're going to find a pathway. But I think all of us recognize the time has come to make changes, but make them in the most reasonable way. And with that saying, we have Senator, I thought he was coming in. I'm trying to, here we go. Senator Langford is back. He ran all the way over to the Senate, to the House floor and back, the Senate chamber. Senator Langford, you are up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I did run to the Senate floor and back, not the House one. They don't welcome me as much there.
Well, sometimes we want to give you back.
Y'all, thank you. I think I am batting cleanup today.
Yes, you are.
To be able to ask some questions. So let me just say first, thank you for all the time that you put into the testimony and in your preparation on this. I just want to be able to try to get some clarifying questions. There is when we talk about the United States and our own mineral development here, and we look at other countries, whether it be in Asia or in Africa or in South America and other places, is there anything distinctly different about our geology that we shouldn't be able to go after some of the minerals that are here? In other words, we know there's the presence of some of the minerals here, but is there something unique about our geology that would say China has that mineral, we have that mineral, but really China should develop that mineral, not us? Or South America has a mineral, we have it, or Australia has it and we have it. I know geology is different. It's not always the same. It's not always the same depth. It's not always the same economical use. But is there something about our geology that we would say we should actually, if the mineral's here and there, we should just get it there instead of here? Anyone want to comment on that?
I'll comment, Senator Langford. Thank you. The geology is what it is, and the minerals are where we find them. But the United States is a vast land that is blessed with a great mineral endowment. And because of that, I do think it's important for us to continue to explore for every kind of mineral. And the one thing I can tell you in our industry is the technology is always advancing, and the ability to find things that are covered, to find mineral deposits that we couldn't have found before is always evolving. And so to me, the answer is this book isn't written yet.
Right. Ms. Sweeney.
I agree completely. I was last week talking to the Association of American State Geologists, and I asked them, what do you say if people say, do we have all these minerals here? And the geologist from Utah said, well, gosh, we have 28 of the 35 critical minerals in Utah right now, and thanks to U.S. Geological Survey and some of the funds that they've made available to the states, the geologists are now going out and doing more mapping than they have done in decades. And they are excited and enthusiastic, and they're finding rare earths. There's a cobalt belt in Missouri. I mean, these are things I just was not aware of, and it's really impressive what we can do when we put our money and mind to it.
Ms. Sweeney, you mentioned in your testimony that permitting for a mine can take 7 to 10 years. Am I reading that correctly?
If you're lucky, if it's a major mine, yes.
So here's what's interesting. Obviously, if you go to Canada or if you go to multiple other countries, Australia, it doesn't take 7 to 10 years to do the permitting on that. No. What does it take in other places?
2 to 3 years in countries with very similar environmental standards and environmental processes.
So when you talk about the 7 to 10 years on permitting, is that for the permitting not including the lawsuits, or does that include the lawsuit time?
That generally does not include the lawsuits.
Okay, so this is the interesting thing. When I've talked to several folks that are going after rare earth minerals in different parts of the country, they would say, yes, I know where they are. Yes, I know the permitting process. But the unpredictable wild card about this are the lawsuits that can come in, that they just trickle in one after another, that even after I have the permit or I'm nearing the permit closure, it is still unpredictable. So their statement is, I'm not going to invest millions of dollars in capital to go do all that has to be done just to have it drug out for 20 years and my capital dry up and a whole series of lawsuits on it. Is that right or wrong? How common is that?
It's fairly common, unfortunately. And not every mine is challenged, but and I don't even know what the percentage would be, but I'm certainly anecdotally familiar with quite a few.
So obviously, we want the outside community to be able to have a voice into this, and litigation's been a way to do that. What's a way to be able to solve this? Because that's not true on building highways. That's not true on building other things. That's not true. There are other solutions to be able to try to figure out how do we get everyone a voice. What's a solution to this? And that's open to anybody. Mr. Wood?
I'd love to answer that. Thank you for the question, sir. I mean, it was mentioned earlier that you can stop mining at the land use plan. If that were allowed actually under law, it would be a perfect solution because you could do things like identify municipal watersheds or sacred sites that shouldn't be subject to mining for the life of the plan. I think that would be a very logical fix to make that would be consistent with other uses of public lands.
Right. But you've also got a situation where a neighbor that's 5 miles away says, if you start mining there, there's going to be dust coming in my house, and I'm going to have to dust my house 5 times a day, and I don't want to have that. So I'm going to sue you, though they're not geographically right next to you. They have that opportunity to be able to do that. How do you solve that?
That's how you do it.
I am with you 100%,
Silence.
trying to be able to figure out how to be able to do this. Well, I would tell you that that's an issue that we do need to figure out a way to resolve. Because that's a long-term issue, that if we don't find a way to be able to solve how to get predictability in the process of permitting, to shrink the length of time on permitting, to get predictability in the environmental processing, and to be able to get predictability in how long people can drag out a challenge to this, then we can talk about it all we want to here, but people aren't going to actually invest the capital to actually do it. And it'll just get held up over and over and over again. And we can talk about how we want to get more electric vehicles, and we have the lithium here, we just can't go after it, or whatever it may be. Cobalt in Missouri, we're still going to have the same issues. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you allowing me to slip in my last question running back and forth from the floor, and I appreciate your time.
You're always most welcome. Thank you, Senator. I want to thank all of you again. I appreciate it very much. I think it's been very informative. You can tell there's an awful lot of excitement and a lot of candor going back and forth, but you all did a great job. So the members are going to have until close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. And with that, we're adjourned.